Wetpixel, and I'd like to welcome you to Wetpixel Live. I'm joined today by a regular contributor, Alexeyevich Mustardovich. Hello, Alex.
Hi, Adam. Good to see you.
How's Moscow?
Yeah, all good. Yeah, nice and warm here today, wearing a t-shirt.
Absolutely. Sorry, I digress. We're going to chat today about something that affects the vast majority of people, really, or to some degree or another, and that's seasickness. Really, Alex and I were chatting about the idea that seasickness can be really debilitating, can affect your ability as an underwater photographer. So we're going to talk about some strategies that you can use to try and avoid seasickness. So with that in mind, Alex, what's your strategy to avoid seasickness?
I think it's a really good topic for discussion, actually, because it's something that is, can be one of the most critical things for someone's productivity as a photographer. And I don't think covered it in my book. I've never seen anyone sort of really talk about it as an underwater photographer, yet it is absolutely critical. So I'm really happy that we're tackling this one. Yeah. I think apologies in advance if any of our stories have to deal with some of the more gruesome aspects of seasickness. But it is a reality we all face. And actually, I had my most recent underwater photography, I really struggle with seasickness. So I think that really brought it home to me. I think in a normal year, I'm on boats so much that I get good sea legs. I'm pretty immune to seasickness. I'll feel the sea, but never really to a point that it's really affecting me. I'll be aware that I'm a bit sleepy one day, or I feel a bit squeezy. I just need a bit of fresh air for a few minutes. But once I'm underwater, it's all gone. Yeah. But having not been on boats much this year, and going out and doing one of the, I think, worst things for seasickness, which is snorkeling out in the open ocean, spending hours on a boat, just drifting and bobbing about in the sea beforehand. I really suffered with seasickness just last week, photographing blue sharks in the UK. And that is a trip that's well known for being bad for that, because of the fact that you're often waiting a couple of hours on the boat for the sharks to arrive. You've got the rather lovely smell of the bait wafting about, and you're just bobbing there on the sea. And then just as you start to get used to that, you then have to kit up and go in the water and get bobbed around even more. And yeah, that really, really set me off.
So it may be worth just mentioning for people that aren't aware of how the blue shark thing is set up, but that's snorkeling, Alex, yeah? Not scootering.
Yeah, it's snorkeling because you're with a boat in the blue. The boat is moving with the tide and the wind a little bit. And if you went diving, you wouldn't be able to keep up with the boat. So you tend to go in around the boat snorkeling and just keep finning all the time to stay with the boat as it just slowly drifts along.
So it sounds very like what we do with the whale sharks in off Mexico, is the Mojeras, which is very similar. And of course, one of the problems with these sort of blue water encounters, by definition, you're a long way offshore, and so the sea conditions often can be quite rolling. You tend to get long swells, and certainly. I mean, that's certainly a situation that people often can find themselves getting a bit ill. So I gather you got ill then, Alex.
Yeah, quite happy to hold my hands up, and I haven't. So I was physically sick 3 times in the water during the shooting, and obviously we'd spent a lot of time and money to be there, so we didn't want to just wave the white flag and give up, and I had to sort of face that. And I typically don't take medication when I'm going to sea, and I do that because I used to work at sea as a marine biologist, and what I learned is after a day or so at sea, I get my sea legs and I'm absolutely fine. Yeah. And I'm much better to ride that first day out, and then be fine for the rest of the trip than have to take medication for days and days on end. Yeah. And that's the way I like to deal with it. The problem with the blue sharks is you go for one day, and I hadn't been on a boat for weeks before, so really, really felt it because it's quite an extreme one anyway. Yeah. And I think what was interesting to me as a photographer is I went there wanting to shoot with my WACP lens. Because I wanted slightly tighter shots of the sharks and get some really nice portraits. They're not super huge, the blue sharks. The biggest ones were about the same length as us. Yeah. And the problem I had was that whenever I put my eye to the viewfinder, I just straight away felt unbelievably sick. And seasickness has this debilitating effect on you. You just can't do anything when it really gets you. Yeah. And so I had to actually switch to my second camera, which had a fisheye on, because with that lens, I was confident I could shoot blind. Yeah. And nearly all these shots, and I'll show you a couple here. This first one of a single blue shark cruising past the sunbeams. Okay. I wasn't looking through my camera to take this, but I had a really good feeling for the composition that I was wanting to take. Yeah. I wanted to get the sun rays in the background. I dialed my exposures in. I got that, and I knew I wanted to shoot slightly down on the shark, because when you shoot down on them, you get the blue on the back. Yeah. If you get the camera underneath them, you get all the white in the face. But this particular shot, I wanted to shoot slightly down on the shark. And I know from experience that as long as I aim in that area, sort of behind the head, around the pectoral fin and the dorsal fin, they'll be nicely framed in the picture. So I was confident with the fisheye I could shoot like this. With the WACP, it's a little bit tight to shoot blind at times, and I felt more confident at getting the shot with the fisheye in the way I was feeling. And you know, obviously in a situation like this, you can also shoot a lot of frames. So ones where they cut straight off. This next one, I had action all around. There's 3 sharks in this picture, and then it was just a case really of just zap, 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 zap. I knew my exposures were right. I wasn't really able to review the pictures much while shooting because I was, again, looking at the LCD screen.
As soon as you look
set
down.
Me off straight away. And there were times during the shoot where you just had to, both me and my buddy who I was out with, I won't name to protect his guilt. We swam back to the boat, and we were, you know, we both were sick 3 times in the water at different times, and you're just there in the water, just, you know, holding onto your camera with one hand, holding onto the boat with the other, and suffering.
So years and years ago, in another life, I was on a naval vessel, and it was a naval vessel was actually not particularly stable because they're designed for speed, not comfort, and we were in some bad weather around Mozambique, and what really surprised me was that the Navy guys, and these guys lived at sea. Everyone was sick. I was sick. Everyone was sick. I mean, I don't particularly suffer from sea. I don't consider myself a seasickness sufferer. And like you, Alex, I tend not to take medication and stuff. But you know, everyone was sick. And so I think that the thing about seasickness is that given the right conditions, whatever they are, we can all suffer from it. So it's something that's worth all underwater photographers really considering, because it does affect your photographic productivity.
Yeah, I'd really back you up on that. When I used to work at sea, we used to have to do a sea survival course. And the first thing you were taught on a sea survival course is that if you have to go into a life raft, the first thing to do is to take seasickness pills. Even if you've worked all your life at sea, the movement of a little vessel on an open sea situation sends everyone seasickness, sick. And in a survival situation, that can obviously be very dehydrating. So the first thing you're told to do. I don't take medication in a diving situation, but I know that the right medication can be really valuable to lots of underwater photographers. It's definitely beyond our scope today to recommend any particular medication. But I would, if you do suffer with seasickness, I would really try and find a medication that works for you. And there's quite a range on the market, and definitely people find some work really well for them and some don't. And everyone has different reactions to different medications, but they can really, really help people. And also things like the bands and things like that, the non-medical treatments.
I would say that it's something else, a little bit of advice on this is general. Speak to your pharmacists. I certainly in the UK, and I can only speak from my knowledge here, is they know much more about diving and the effects of medication on diving than most doctors do. So you know, if in doubt, go to your pharmacist, and if you're planning to dive, then say, look, I'm going diving, I suffer from seasickness, what medication should I choose? And generally they're very, very clued up on what works and what doesn't, and also what there are some that are potentially harmful when you're diving. So you have to be a little bit careful with those. As Alex says, though, not really the scope of this particular discussion, but important medication. If you think you're going to get ill, get some medication. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think other things that you can do to really alleviate the issues is be aware of what can set you off in terms of seasickness. And when I used to go to sea, or the old for work for marine biology, the old sea dogs working on the research vessels used to say there's one guaranteed cure for seasickness that works every time, and that's to sit under an old oak tree. Works every time. Sadly, that's not always possible out there on the ocean. But actually, fresh air, horizon, and the ability to give yourself a break from it can be really important. A quick lie down can really help. Fresh air really helps. I think smells can really set you off. And that whole process of kitting up as a diver, I think, can really set you off. Having to look down, doing clips up. And you can often really help yourself by having a friend to do that. Or if you know you're going to suffer with seasickness, you know, get kitted up before the boat stops. And then speak to the dive staff and say, look, I want to get in the water straight away once it's safe to. So get kitted up while the boat's moving and you're not really suffering. And then get kitted up and get in. And particularly in a scuba diving situation, once you can get away from that surface chop, you tend not to suffer as much. If it's really big swells, you'll obviously feel them all the way down. But the feeling gets less and less as you go down, until, of course, you get really close to the seabed, and then you can often start to get surge, and that can get really bad.
So I find quite often when I'm if there's kelp, for example, moving with the surge backwards and forwards, I'm making you ill just looking at it. Yeah. It can be, again, it makes me feel queasy. I'm not actually normally sick, but certainly it can be, and that's a good thing. I think something else you raise very well, Alex, as well. In general, and obviously this varies from person to person.
I'm good at bringing things up, Adam.
In general, the when a boat's at motion, it's easier to deal with than when the boat stops. So once a boat stops, and particularly smaller boats, ribs are notorious for this. They start wallowing in the swell, and that's very difficult. So I think really good advice from Alex there. Get yourself geared up while the boat's moving, and then the moment it stops, hop over the side, and somehow that helps. The worst thing you can do, and I was going to mention something else that we tend to do as photographers. Make sure your equipment's ready to go as well. As you really don't want to be trying to focus on some kind of last minute problem with your gear, looking down at the gear while you've got a bit of swell around, because that will also make you feel really sick. And of course, that's really suboptimum, because you're now in a situation where you've got a problem with your gear. You actually may not be able to dive, you may not be able to get into water. And
that's ultimately the biggest consequence of seasickness, isn't it? Is it actually can be so bad that it stops you doing your photography completely. Smells really set people off, and that's one of the problems with the blue shark trip, is that we use bait to attract the sharks in, and generally bait never smells wonderful. No. And that smell, I think, combined with the motion, really sets people off. Also, engine fumes can be really bad for that. So the more fresh air you can get yourself in, the better you'll generally feel. And often if you suffer, it's about skirting that line between feeling okay and really descending into proper seasickness can make a really big difference.
I think something we touched on it earlier, but also this idea of snorkeling as well. Snorkeling at the surface by itself can be quite queasy making, because obviously when you're at the surface, you're being subject to the action of the waves. You're going up and down, and that can make you feel so. Again, I mean, it's not always an option you have, but if you have the option, and you are considering seasickness, actually diving is sometimes easier than snorkeling, and snorkeling can. You can't get out of that surface. You can't get out for very long out of the surface water movement. Yeah, absolutely.
So another little cure that I've seen work very well on dive boats, and it's a good one for dive boats because it involves getting wet, is to cool down the back of your neck. And I think it cools down the blood going to your head, and it seems to really help. And I've seen them use this a lot in the Cayman Islands, where people can get seasickness on some of the dives there, and they'll get a cup of ice water and they'll literally tip it on the back of someone's neck. And it's obviously not a very pleasant thing to do. It's perfectly nice in the tropics, to be fair. But actually that cooling down effect really cures people of seasickness. And I've seen them use that. I've seen them use a wet towel on the back of someone's neck, and again, really can help people. But I mean, just much better to plan for and mitigate ahead of time than get to the point of feeling seasick. The way we were dealing with it with sharks is we knew that after being sick, we'd have this sort of 10 to 15 minute window of feeling, completely happy, feeling good. And I think during that window, we were, that was our approach. We'd shoot to you feeling sick, go and be sick, feel horrible for a minute or two, and then have 10, 15 minutes of grace to go and do your shots. And then the next wave of seasickness will get you again. So, but yeah, I just think it's just really nice to talk about and be honest about it, because it's something that as underwater photographers, it is really critical. Knowing how to deal with it and deal with it for yourself, I think, is essential for success. Yet we never talk about it really.
And many years ago, I used to dive with this is in South Africa, in Sedwana. I used to dive with a guy who used to suffer terribly from seasickness, but he's one of these guys who just used to get on with it. He used to get sick and get on with it. And invariably, he was being sick through his regulator during descent. And we used to hang around with cameras because he used to get a really nice halo of fish around his head as we were descending.
Well, I have to say, on a shark dive, when you're producing additional chum, you do start to feel a little bit nervous. And I was definitely making sure when I was being sick, I hadn't have anything flapping about.
There we go. Be careful where you're sick. Yes, a really good topic, and obviously one that's not talked about very much.
Sorry everyone about that one, but I think it is
good in a bad way, or bad. Anyway, so we've got a couple of pictures of Alex's blue shots that he kindly shared with us, obviously as part of this episode. Where can people see the rest of the images from that shoot, Alex?
Well, all the ones that, obviously a few of them had some unusual backscattering. Sorry, enough of these jokes. Sorry, no. Yeah. If you go to my, I've shared a few on social media, but if you go to my website and type blue sharks, I think the most recent 10 or 12 are from the shoot last week. I might process a couple more in the coming days, but there's only so much variation. I kind of wanted certain shots, and I got them.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks for that, Alex. Thank you very much. Most insightful. And I'd like to thank our sponsor, which is Cindy Bags Underwater. I would like to thank you all for watching. As always, please feel free to add a like if this was useful. I anticipate actually there might be quite a few comments about this topic, so please share your recipes for avoiding seasickness in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.